Hello everybody, welcome to my channel. My name's Sam, this is Frugalissima, where I talk about all things sewing. Today I want to have a little bit of a chat about sewing tools that you can find free or that might be in your house somewhere. But first of all, I'd just like to say thank you for everyone who has been watching these videos. I'm putting together a series of videos for anyone who is sewing on a budget or might be new to sewing, needs hints and tips, or you just want to sew cheaply. So this is day 34 of 100 days of sewing, and today I'm going to talk about some of the bits and pieces that you might be able to find around the house that you can use in your sewing practice just to make things a little bit easier and cheaper. I've got 10 items that I use on a regular basis. Some things I've picked up as a hint on Pinterest over the years and used, and some things I've just found to be useful. So number one is this. So this is the cardboard inner from a roll of fabric, and what I've done is I've cut it in half. It's a little bit long for the purpose that I use it for, full length. But I have found that most fabric shops will give you these for nothing. And what I use it for is in place of a sleeve roll. This is a sleeve roll, and as you can see you've got a wool side and a cotton side, but they're actually quite short, and I find these of much more use because it's just a bit longer, and I use them on legs of trousers as well. So essentially what you use them for is pressing your seams when you don't want the imprint of the seam to come through your fabric. And I've used this for years. I must have had this about 4 or 5 years, and because it's cardboard, it's and it's round, it's ideal for the job. You can of course use a towel for the same purpose. Lots of people use a rolled up towel. I just find them a little bit on the floppy side, but if you roll it quite tightly, I'm willing to bet everybody's got one of these in the house if you don't want to buy a sleeve roll. Sleeve rolls are about, I don't know, around about £10, and you can make them as well, obviously. Although I bought the sleeve roll fairly recently, I still come back to this cardboard tube. So that's my first one. You may notice here as well, in the background here, that's a little mini ironing board for, they call that a sleeve board. It does have a slightly different purpose to a sleeve roll, and I picked that up for £1 on a car boot sale. I very, very rarely use that, to be honest. So on to number 2, and I've mentioned this before, and that is slivers of soap for marking your fabric. You can't mark your patterns with it, but you can mark darker coloured fabric. So this is useful in a pinch if you can't find your tailor's chalk. You need to make sure it's reasonably dry. I've just picked that up out of the bathroom and it's still a little bit damp, but it needs to be dried out. I would just test your fabric first. Maybe some soaps are different, but I've really honestly never had any problems getting the soap out. And again, it's a good use of something, a byproduct if you like. Something else from the bathroom that I use are these cotton buds, and I use these for cleaning my machine out. I use other bits and pieces as well, but these are quite useful for getting in nooks and crannies. The cotton on the end attracts the lint out of the machine. Quite good for getting in various nooks and crannies. So that's the third one. So my next one is pebbles that I picked up from my local beach. Nice flat white pebbles, and I use these for holding my fabric down. I generally use a cutting mat and a rotary cutter for cutting fabric. But it depends on the project, and I'm not going to suggest that you buy a cutting mat because they are quite a big purchase. It costs around about £70 or £80 for the bigger ones, but still useful for holding your fabric down. I've used these for years and years. 3 or 4 of them are plenty for most jobs. If you can't get hold of pebbles, then any kind of low-lying can, like a can of tuna or something. I don't suggest something any higher. I've seen people use wine bottles and what have you. You don't want something that's going to be easily knocked over, so something fairly low-lying, they're perfect. So the next little thing is something that I keep in my sewing drawer, and it's this little tub full of rubber bands. Useful for lots and lots of things. what I use them for in the main is for keeping my bobbin attached to my thread. You might have several reels of white thread. It's just a way of keeping the right ones together, really. Once you've put that on in a drawer and you've separated it, you're never sure whether it's the same one. So I keep them together like that, and it's just a question of poking the elastic through the bobbin like that, just pulling it through the end, and it just bobs over there. This is a large reel of thread, and it works on all of them. I've seen people use elastic bands for all sorts of things, but that's what I use mine for. You can put them on your sewing machine to mark out your seam allowances, so your 3/8 of an inch or your 5/8 of an inch, whichever you're using. I wouldn't recommend doing that for around something that's going to move about like that. I would recommend using a flatter elastic band like that, just to stop it from moving, because you don't want to sort of measure out as a seam allowance and then it move about. That's number 5. Number 6 on my list is using these cork placemats that I just picked up in Lidl. I can't remember how much they were, and I did buy them specifically for this job, but they are marketed as placemats, and I put those underneath my sewing machines. Now, of course, you can make fancier ones if you like, but it just stops them, number one, from sliding about so much, and it just, with it being cork, it just dulls the sound a little bit, so it stops them from being so noisy. I think they were a couple of £1 each, but I did actually buy them specifically for that. But they are placemats, and like I say, you can make a nice fancy one out of quilting cotton and what have you, but I found those really useful. So the 7th thing on my list is a sponge. I use this for gathering up threads and bits of threads and bits of stray fabric. Once I've finished a sewing project, I'll either go over the table or my sewing table or the cutting mat, and just the fact that it's sponge just gathers it up quite nicely. This just lives in my sewing drawer, and I just use it when I've finished a project. And it's just something everybody's going to have. But another useful one in the same vein is the lint roller, and these are great for the same that I've mentioned before, picking up stray threads, making sure that you're not covered in threads before you leave the house, which I often do, and also for if you've unpicked a seam, for picking up the unpicked stitches. So I'll just demonstrate very quickly. So here's a seam that I've just quickly unpicked, and you can see those stray threads there, and instead of trying to unpick them from that side, so if you do it from this side and roll your lint roller over the top, just pulls them straight through. So yeah, handy little tool, these lint rollers, and I picked these up from IKEA. I don't know if it's £1 or something like that, for about 4 or 5 in a packet. So my next one is something that drives me crazy, and that's sewing books that don't lie flat. So you have it on your table and it just all flies shut whilst you're trying to read a pattern. And the solution that I came up with for that particular one is this handy little cookbook stand. It's got a stand at the back there. Had this for years and years. It's not in the best condition, but it serves its purpose. When I'm working on a pattern, I just bob it in like that, and it just keeps the page open to the one that I'm using. And it's a lot easier to read as well when it's upright like that. Let me know below if you've got any household items that you use on a regular basis for your sewing practice, and what you use. I like to use things that are available easily rather than going out and buying new things. Sometimes you like to believe that you need all these fantastic tools, and they do make life easier, certainly, but sometimes if you have a look around, you can find something at home that will do the job just as well. So the next one is something that probably everybody knows about, and that's either a chopstick or a knitting needle for getting sharp corners on either your collars or any waistband or anything like that. I find the knitting needle slightly better. You don't want one that's too pointy that's going to shoot straight through your fabric. this chopstick that I've got here has got quite a blunt end on it. I've got others that are a bit sharper. My last one is good old greaseproof or baking paper. This is in a bit of a state, it's been in my drawer. Just useful for tracing out things. The only thing I would say about it is, obviously it's very narrow. You've only got about 50 centimetres here, and because it's greaseproof, it's quite difficult to tape together. But useful in a push if you've run out of tracing paper. You can to trace off patterns, smaller pieces of patterns if you're running out of tracing paper, or if like mine it's on a big roll and you just want something small, it's quite useful. And most people have got that in their drawers. So my bonus tip is something that you've probably already got, and that's your tape measure. Now, I've seen it advised on a few places where you can use your tape measure as a 5/8 of an inch guide. So if you're sewing a seam or you're doing a hem or something like that, you can use that rather than having to get out a seam gauge or measure it. Be very careful of that advice. This is only 1/2 inch. But just knowing that is the case, you can still work with that. So it's a bit of a freebie. So just make sure that you know how wide that is, measure it on another measuring tool, and you can use that. It's quite useful for turning up hems or something like that. So that's your bonus one. I hope you found this useful. I'll come back another time and come up with some other bits and pieces that I use on a regular basis that don't really cost the earth. There's lots of things in the sewing world that we're led to believe that we really need. My very first videos of this 100 days of sewing, I'd sort of covered the 10 essential items that you did need. That's your sewing machine, fabric, patterns, scissors, measuring tool, marking tool, and what else is there? Pins, an iron and an ironing board, seam ripper, and thread. So that was the 10 things that I recommended, and like I say, you're often told that you need all sorts of things, but it does depend entirely on what kind of sewing that you're going to be doing. So before you start going out and buying everything. My husband has a t-shirt that says all the gear, no idea, and I think sometimes it can be a little bit like that in sewing, in that you end up with all sorts of bits and bats. I mean, you can see I've got an array of stuff here, but I have been sewing a long time. So long as you've got those items, really, you can get by. There's no need to go spending a fortune. Okay, that's it from me. I'm going to say goodbye now. I will come back with some other ideas and maybe some things that you can make for your sewing room as well. I think that might be a good one. Let me know below if you've got any ideas of things that you've made in the past, or if you've got anything that you use on a regular basis in the sewing room, or if you've got any tools that you use that are just regular household items. Thanks for watching. Bye.